Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more of the Communist Manifesto. We're starting to get some of the beliefs that and ideas that can go into the making of a communist society when women are treated equally, not just as prostitutes or baby makers, when children are not forced to survive by working these dangerous jobs. So, with that said, let's go ahead and hop into this. What else does the history of ideas prove than that intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production is changed? The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of the ruling class. When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact that within the old society the elements of the new one have been created, and that the dissolution of the old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the old conditions of existence. When the ancient world was in its last throes of ancient religions, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the sway of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development. But religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survive this change. There are, besides, eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society. But communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality. Instead of constituting them on a new basis, it therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms. Antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. But whatever form they may have taken, one fact is common to all past ages, viz., the exploitation of one part of society by another. No wonder, then, why the social consciousness of past ages, despite all the multiplicity and variety it displays, moves within certain common forms or general ideas which cannot completely vanish except with the total disappearance of class antagonisms. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. But let us have done with the bourgeois objections to communism. We have seen above that the first step of the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class, to win the battle of democracy. the proletariat will use the political supremacy to wrest, by all degrees, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, or are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. The measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be generally applicable. 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all right to inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. 8. Equal liability of all to labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of population over the country. 10. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of the children's factory labor in its present form. Combination of education with industrial production, etc., etc. When in this course of development, class distinctions have disappeared and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. Political powers, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. If the proletariat during its contest with the bourgeoisie is compelled by the force of circumstances to organize itself as a class, if by means of a revolution it makes itself the ruling class, and by such sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, and it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Part 3, Socialist and Communist Literature. 1. Reactionary Socialism. Part A, Feudal Socialism. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. In the French Revolution in July of 1830 and in the English Reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth, a serious political contest was altogether out of the question. A literary battle alone remained possible, but even in the domain of literature, the old cries of the Restoration period had become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy were obliged to lose sight, apparently, of their own interest and to formulate the indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interest of the exploited working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took the revenge by singing lampoons on their new master and whispering in his ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. In this way arose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half echo of the past, half menace of the future, at times by its bitter, witty, and indecisive criticism striking the bourgeoisie to the very heart's core, but always ludicrous in its effect through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian alms bag in front of a banner. But the people, so often as it joined them, saw on their hindquarters the old feudal coats of arms and deserted with loud and irreverent laughter. The section of the French Legitimists and Young England exhibited this spectacle in pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different from that of the bourgeoisie. The feudalists forget that they were exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different and that are now antiquated. In showing that under their rule the modern proletariat never existed, they forget that the modern bourgeoisie is the necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism that their chief accusation against the bourgeoisie amounts to this: that under the bourgeois regime, a class is being developed which is destined to cut up and branch the old order of society, or cut up root and branch of the old order of society. What they upbraid the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. The political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against the working class, and in ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases, they stoop to pick up the golden apples dropped by the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot sugar, and potato spirit. And as the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so the clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriages, against the state? Has it not preached in the place of these charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life and mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart burnings of the aristocrat. Part B, Petty Bourgeois Socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not the only class that was ruined by the bourgeoisie. Not the only class whose conditions of existence pined and perished in the atmosphere of modern bourgeois society. The medieval burgesses and the small peasant proprietors were the precursors of the modern bourgeoisie. In those countries which are but little developed, industrially and commercially, these two classes still vegetate side by side with the rising bourgeoisie. In countries where the modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeois has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie, and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeois society. The individual member of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of competition, and as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society to be replaced in manufactures, agriculture, and commerce by overlookers, bailiffs, and shopmen. In the countries like France, where the peasants constitute far more than half the population, it was natural that writers who sided with the proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use in their criticism of the bourgeois regime the standard of the peasant and petty bourgeois, and from the standpoint of these intermediate classes should take up the cudgels for the working class. Thus arose petty bourgeois socialism. Sismondi was the head of this school, not only in France but also in England. This school of socialism dissected with great acuteness the contradictions in the conditions of modern production. It laid bare the hypocritical apologies of economists It proved incontrovertibly the disastrous effects of machinery and division of labor, the concentration of capital and land in the few hands, overproduction, and crises. It pointed out the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeois and peasant, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy in production, and the crying inequalities in the distribution of wealth and industrial war of extermination between nations. The dissolution of old moral bonds, of the old family relations, and old nationalities. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to restoring the old means of production and of exchange, and with them the old property relations of the old society, or to cramping the modern means of production and of exchange within the framework of the old property relations, and have been and were bound to be exploded by those means. In either case, it is both reactionary and utopian. In its last words, our corporate guerrilla for manufacture, patriarchal relations in agriculture. Ultimately, when the stubborn historical facts had dispersed all intoxicating effects of self-deception, this form of socialism ended in a miserable fit of the blues. German or true socialism. The socialist and communist literature of France, a literature that originated under the pressure of the bourgeoisie in power, and that was the expression of the struggle against this power, was introduced into Germany at a time when the bourgeoisie in that country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism. German philosophers, would-be philosophers, and beaux esprits eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, French social conditions had not immigrated along with them. In contact with German social conditions, this French literature lost all its immediate practical significance and assumed a purely literary aspect. Thus, to the German philosophers of the 18th century, the demands of the First French Revolution were nothing more than the demands of practical reason in general, and the utterances of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified in their eyes the law of future will, of pure will, of will as it was bound to be, of true human will generally. The work of the German literati consisted solely in bringing about the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical conscience, or rather in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexation took place in the same way in which a foreign language is appropriated, namely by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical works of ancient heathendom had been written. The German literati reversed this process with the profane French literature. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of the economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity, and beneath the French criticism of the bourgeois state, they wrote dethronement of the category of the cathedral and of the general and so forth. The introduction of these philosophical phrases in the back of the French historical criticisms they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, the philosophical foundation of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated, and since it ceased in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness and of representing not true requirements, but the requirements of truth, not the interests of the proletariat, but the interest of human nature, of man in general, who belongs to no class, has no reality, and exists only in the misty realm of philosophical fantasy. But we'll go ahead and end that part there. That puts us to page 50. Boom. Having a problem with some of the pages loading up here. My apologies. It's taking so long. I don't know why it's taking so long. Ooh. Yeah, it looks like it ends on page 60. The main parts of the text. Let me see about these last few pages here, because everything's taking its time to load. But yeah. Anyway, he tells us, look, even in French philosophical thoughts of communism, they still write it under the conditions that is provided via the bourgeois society. So everything is still based on that. And it had to be reset, and they compare it to the way the Catholic Church often tried to write out other historical tales. Yeah, we ended page 50, so it looks like page 50 to 60 will be the end. There's only just a little bit on page 60, so we're about done with the pamphlet here. Should take one more episode, but yeah. He talks about how they had to really dig deep into some of the ideas. And they also break down, oh look, there had to be a form of feudal socialism. Under feudalism, kings, dukes, lords, all that stuff. Peasants. They're like, look, they still have to be there. they still need to be able to live, to work your lands. And then we go into petty bourgeois socialism. So we've surpassed the age of feudalism, and now it's big money makers, shopkeepers, who control the means of production even though they themselves don't contribute to the production. Now, with that said, next episode we'll be talking about conservative or bourgeois socialism. And that'll take us into the final part, which is a short one. Position of the communist in relation to the various existing opposition parties. So yeah. It's like, look, there shouldn't be private property or so much private property in so few hands. Land should belong to the people as a whole. Now, you can have your own spaces to put up your own home, or if you also want to grow a small garden with it, very well. But there's no need for people to own these huge swaths of land and tell people, no, don't enter on my land. That helps no one but the wealthy, the bourgeois. And that's what we're kind of getting at. Let's see. Before we even get into the socialist and communist literature, part 3, he gives us says, nevertheless, the most advanced countries, the following will all be pretty applicable. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Again, that's that. You don't need these huge swaths of land. And it's very much an attack on the idea of landlords, of dukes owning huge stretches of lands and stuff. So, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax, meaning the poor pay less and the rich pay more. Something we still can't seem to get. Abolition of all right of inheritance. Your kids shouldn't get all your money and be rich because you had all that money. You know, we don't continuously need all of those Nepo babies. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. confiscation of rebels. You can understand people who rebel against the state. Yeah, take their stuff. Migrants, but these are not set in stone. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. So, a national bank, a central bank. It's an idea that's been tried in the U.S. before. I believe it was it Hamilton that was looking to achieve a national bank? Alexander Hamilton a national bank. Yes, Hamilton, first Secretary of State, advocated for and played a key role in establishing a national bank, believing it was crucial for the nation's financial stability and economic development. So, yeah. So, yeah, it would be good to have a national bank to help set up certain things. Though that does not mean there should be a complete and utter abolishment of community banks. I believe they also serve a great responsibility as well. Now, we no longer have a national bank. I don't believe. Let me double check. I don't want to be lying to y'all. I cannot type. Have a national bank. It's saying the Federal Reserve System is a national bank, often shortened to the Fed. Excuse me. But that was according to the AI setting. If you look at Wikipedia, National Bank is an ordinary private bank operating under the federal government's regulatory structure, which usually but not always operates in multiple U.S. states and is under the supervision of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Depending on the matter, it may also comply with some U.S. state regulations. It is legally required to be a member of the Fed. A national bank is in the U.S. So you look at that, it's so kind of yes with the Federal Reserve System. Okay. Let's see. Now, I'm not sure about an exclusive monopoly. If they're just saying only have a national bank, no. I feel a national bank can be a good thing, but you need the other community banks around it. But if they mean an exclusive monopoly, like how the U.S. originally had each state create and print its own currency, and that idea was eventually scrapped for a single form of currency in the U.S., then that is something I can kind of agree with. Because you don't want all these varying, competing forms of currency. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. I feel there are some things that could be very well done if they are nationalized. Transport, basic communications, electricity. Shoot, you don't think of it, but the last few winters in Texas have shown us, yeah, that company is not up to the standard of making sure the state has the electricity needs during winter. And so, yes, I feel there are some things that would be better doled out through national means. But, yeah, a national transportation system, we've got the road system, but not everybody has cars. If we have access to a national train system, whether it be subway, whether it's monorail, whether Amtrak, whatever. If we were to have a further strengthened and nationalized transport system, it would provide a much better way to move about the nation. And communication, we used to have it all in the U.S. Postal Service, but some stupid president decided to stick his fingers in the pie and poke holes all in it. You know, we could, if we weren't addicted to electing stupid ass motherfuckers, we could have a mail system, phone system, internet system, guaranteed, covered, protected under a nationalized system. But no, they'd rather poke holes in it and say, see, the private company could do better. The national one could do better too until you started tearing pieces out here and there willy-nilly. Part 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. This I think of as proper regulations and trying to make sure everybody has an equal chance. Because many of these companies, they're like, we can save money if we don't give a crap about actual regulations. Well, guess what? Those regulations are there to protect everybody else. It's not meant so you make less money. It's meant to protect their asses from your greedy stupidity. And also think Dust Bowl. They recultivated the land because it had reached a point where the top layer of soil was just blowing off and the land was becoming non-fertile in terms of trying to grow crops. So yeah. Part 8, equal liability of all to labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Yeah, it's no longer about doing things for a company. This is for the better good of society, for yourself, for your neighbor. Not so some asshole can make a few extra $1 million. 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the population over the country. So yeah. People think, oh, U.S., 350 million people. But the great majority are in cities. If you took the states of Washington, Oregon, California, and then the East Coast states, you would have just as much population in them because there's so many coastal cities. You have as much population in them as you do the rest of the nation between, because they're spread so much more apart in the middle of the U.S. So yeah. And one of the things that you might seek within a communist ideation, you want to eliminate the idea of a city having so much more influence by letting everybody have their own homestead, their own home. They say combination of agriculture and manufacturing industries, which again, that's still part of that kind of separating towns and countries to where they're kind of equal, because you still need agriculture, but you still want an industrial society that can continue to make things. And finally, they end free education for all children in public schools, which is something we absolutely must have. Free K through 12, free public colleges, absolutely. Abolition of children's factory labor in the present form. Remember, again, this was written in the 1800s. You had children doing all kinds of ridiculous labor they had no purpose doing, other for the fact then company owners were greedy and they saw they could take advantage. And then combination of education with industrial production. You get educated, but you also learn potential trades. So yeah. But we'll go ahead and end this episode there. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting sources and links in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.